Okay, cool. All right, we're here at GenCon final day, Sunday. We got Will Shick from Atomic Mass Games here.
You cornered me.
Right in the corner. He tried to get away. We are here today. We want to talk a little bit about Legion.
Yeah.
Obviously, right before GenCon, big announcements, big rule changes. Like I said earlier, it caught us totally by surprise. Was not expecting that. Like, we were getting ready for GenCon, kind of, sort of expecting sort of everything about Legion and stuff to kind of be done in mini extravaganza.
Yeah.
I mean, not the game done, announcements and stuff, and sort of coming here prepared to mostly just be doing like Star Wars Unlimited stuff. But yeah, this was just so big. we didn't really have a chance to dig into the rules, to really experience all the changes. So just kind of to start out with, what sort of prompted you guys to kind of do this big overhaul?
Yeah, so I mean, like kind of backstory, right? We've been working on effectively this whole system, like the whole idea behind updating the game and doing a rebalance and a refresh on some of the rules and everything. That's been in process since really we took stewardship of the game, right? We knew that by the time we had gotten Legion, it was 2 years old, a little over 2 years old, 2.5, I think. And so, every game has a life cycle. Every game, as you work at stuff, you want to make sure that you're consistently updating it to make sure that it's the best thing it possibly can be. And there are a couple different ways to do that, right? Traditionally, in tabletop gaming, just in general, you see new additions. And so one of the things that we really want to do at Atomic Mass, and we were fortunate in the fact that I think the original designers for Legion at FFG also had this in mind, right, is if we can do updates and continually kind of tend the games and make them better with passes and adjustments as needed, then to us that's way better than doing a whole like hard edition, right? Where you're like, here's a big break, everything's different. Maybe some of your old stuff doesn't actually work anymore. Like it's a very big shakeup. Now sometimes games need that, right? Sometimes you have so many changes, so many things that have to get adjusted that a hard break is good. But for us, it was really about analyzing and really digging into what Legion was, understanding what the players were like running up against in terms of frustrations or things that they felt could be improved, right? A lot of that was, those original units and characters weren't quite living up to the dream or the efficiencies of the modern release stuff. And that always happens in development as you get better at the job, as you understand the game system better, as you see what the game wants as it grows. You obviously kind of design and develop towards that, right? It doesn't make sense to be like, well, we're trapped in the old way that nobody likes, so we'll just keep making things that nobody likes because otherwise we'll unbalance the game. So the tension of game design and development in general is, okay, this exists, how do we keep pushing forward? How do we make things better without completely, power creep, like running into power creep or exploiting the game in a way that basically makes it so those old things are completely not usable. So we knew that rebalancing was going to be important. We also saw a lot of player frustration or staleness in the battle deck, and we dug into that. I think we watched some 100+ hours of tape of just players playing the game for different competitive events, seeing how those games function, what the turn zero was meaning. And we really realized that the players, a lot of those feelings were around turn zero, right? Turn zero was just too heavily weighted to the game. If a really smart player who understood turn zero exceptionally well, got everything in their favor, it was very, very difficult once the game actually begun for the other player to come back and win it. And any single mistake by a player that maybe wasn't as skilled or wasn't as knowledgeable about the turn zero stuff, it was kind of it was almost an interactive game at that point because the turn zero meant so much. So we knew we wanted to go in and kind of adjust that as well. And then last but not least, obviously, since the core rulebook update, which was kind of the first step in our overall ownership and really understanding the game, right? We took the RRG and the Learn to Play and we created a real core rulebook for the game, and that was the 2.5 versioning. And so that was kind of, okay, now we've really gotten into the guts of this. We feel confident that we understand everything that's going on. And from there, that's when we started building on. That was kind of the foundational step of, what's coming next. So even when we released that, we knew that that wasn't the last time we were going to touch the rules. But we also understood that there were so many interconnected parts between the unit rebalances that we wanted to do, the character rebalances, the battle deck rebalances, and things like that, that we needed that step so that we can get to the next step. Because we didn't want to completely shake up the game in its entirety. And then once we got to this point, right, and we wrapped, one of the things is that I don't think we really touched on this in Mini Wrap, but all of this development for these changes were wrapped like in May, right? They were locked and ready to go to print. So the thing is that, one of our analysis points is the game, we're putting so much effort and energy into these big changes, right? So, and there's only so much to go around. So one of the things we talked about at Mini Wrap is like everyone's noticed that the release schedule for Legion has been a little light. And that's because we've had to balance creating new releases to also making sure that we're setting the game up for significant success going forward, getting to this new version, and then building off of that. There's also that extra step of we're moving the game to multilingual. So there's a lot of different things like that are in the works. But effectively, once we hit that point, our decision earlier than that, we knew this like going into it. But we knew that once we had completed the work on this, it was really important to us to get it out to the players as soon as possible. The existing player base, the veteran players, we wanted to give them, a new energy and a new freshness to the game to really hopefully like drive their excitement and maybe reclaim some folks who had been like, well, I know what Legion is, and I'm moving on to other newer different things, right? So to bring that community back and really give it a footprint to grow from and explode into as we get into next year when those products are going to be coming out in print and all of that. So it's like we talked about at Mini Wrap, right? It's a multi-step kind of process, but it was definitely one of those ones where we absolutely wanted to look at, okay, what do we need to do to make Legion the greatest game it can be, to give us the design space that we need to move forward, and to ensure that this game is going to be awesome for the next 5-10 years, right? Yeah. And there's no question that during that time, we're going to continue to update the versioning, we're going to address issues that need to be addressed, and we're going to make changes that are going to overall like benefit the game in general. But that's really where it came from. It all came from the fact that, every game over its lifespan needs to have like a little makeover, right? It needs to have some adjustments. As more and more things get added to it, you have to go in and clean those up, you have to adjust things. And also player taste changes, right? Like players, the tabletop world is so interesting because there's always new things coming out. There's always new innovations and ideas on how things should be done. And I think we as players, of these games, we grow and adjust what we're looking for. And so kind of trying to track that in parallel with design and development with a game like Legion, right? It's really important too. And you want to make sure that you're delivering that experience that the vast majority of players want, that's going to make them excited to come back, that's going to continue to energize their communities, to keep playing in the stores and overall. So it's a huge monumental task. I'm really excited with the community's reception on it, though. It seems like everyone has very much enjoyed most of what we've done. And I look forward to people getting more and more games in and seeing how the system gets to evolve and grow from here. Yeah. There's some really cool plans.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited to try with the new system is the new battle deck. When Legion first came out, I thought, a lot of us thought the method of building sort of your scenario for each game was really cool and interesting because it was different every time. But in practice, I think we started to find, as you started to learn the different scenarios and stuff. With the veto system, you kind of ended up going down to basically playing the same one or two things every time, because it's not like, okay, this is my list is built to do this thing, and so that's what I'm always going to push for, and your opponent kind of does the same thing too. So it didn't end up really being as varied as you maybe could have hoped. But I think especially like the secondary objective that you guys are adding into that is I think, a very cool thing. I'm really looking forward to giving that a try.
Yeah, the battle deck was a really interesting journey for us to go on because, I think at its core, right, I absolutely agree. I loved the innovation that original Legion had with the idea that, you kind of dynamically built the mission before you played. But I think, like you mentioned, right, in practice, what happened is these players got better and better at manipulating that deck and understanding how it could interact with list building and SKU building, especially because only one player's deck was being used. This is kind of where we came to, right? When only one player's deck is being used, it means that that player has a significant impact. And so what we wanted to do was kind of innovate a little bit and push that more and make sure there was a dialogue between players. Because I think that's what the original veto system was trying to do in essence, right? It was, okay, here are our options. Now you and I are going to sit down and we're going to try to like manipulate battlefield advantage to our success. But the reality was, and this was kind of the first step, right, is that originally it was 3 cards out of 4, then we made it all 4. Even all 4 didn't push it enough. It helped, but it didn't push it enough. So we moved to that dialogue where both players are using their decks and they're replacing. We also took out the perfect information because that means that it's less easy for a really smart or skilled player to steamroll their opponent if they're not necessarily as in tune with the turn 0. There's a bit more luck, and I think that matches with real world battle, right? Like nobody goes in with perfect information in war. You're always making a plan, but you're dealing with what it hands you, and that's where tactical genius and strategy really come out, is in dealing with the things you didn't plan for and how you approach those. And the secondary objectives were interesting because we didn't originally have them baked in. Originally, it was just primary conditions, or primary missions, battlefield conditions, and then we had the advantages. And what happened was we realized that the battlefield condition cards were really just always negative. Players were just, they either got one that did nothing, in which case they were like, yay, it doesn't do anything, or they got one and they were like, this so much unbalances like the game experience and it's so impactful that we don't like it. So we took that and we said, if we replace that, what can we do with it? And one of the things that a lot of us in the office have always enjoyed are like secret objectives or secondary objectives, things that break the play pattern, right? That challenge players to say, okay, you have this plan and this straightforward like way to win, but if you're willing to go and push yourself in this way or extend your line over here, or maybe like make what would be considered a non-optimal play from the primary mission objective, you might pay off big. That became really exciting to us. We saw a lot of really positive feedback from the playtesters. It was also a way to really start to add flavor and uniqueness into it. Because when you're making that primary mission, you want it to be very balanced and equal for both players to be able to interact with. But the secondaries, because they have a limited scoring factor, they only let you get so many points. You can really start to drive home some of those things like, all right, equip your units with a bomb and go blow something up, or mark some units for death and go after them really hard, and those kinds of things. And that really, I think, was the secret sauce that turned the normal like straightforward primary missions into something that was exciting and different every time.
Well, and I think in some ways, some of them, like at least I know, like the one with the suppression, you guys kind of showed up there in extravaganza. It almost feels like an achievement. Kind of
absolutely.
System where it's like you got one kind of easy one, and then you got this one going to be difficult to pull off for most commanders, but if you can, it's
again, that goes back to that idea of especially with the suppression one, bring them to heal, which we showed off, right? That's one where in testing and in our games and everything else, what we saw was people would like hit the first level, and then that second level would happen on like turn 4, round 4, round 5, right? Where there weren't as many units left, so it was more possible. So you could be like, well, I can try to really push for this objective, and I might not get it, or I can spread my fire and try to score these 2 and win the game. And that was really cool. It was really cool to see those decision points where players weren't just necessarily interacting with one objective, but instead they had these moments where they're like, okay, I could do this, but are my odds better trying this, or do I want to do that? And then the other thing is that those secondary objectives do favor certain list builds. So you do kind of get the idea that if you take a suppression heavy force, you kind of bring them to heal. If I see that you have a lot of suppression, I'm probably going to want to try to get rid of that secondary, right? And so again, it goes back to that dialogue of trying to control the battle deck, which goes back to the original intention and I think design of the whole thing, which was we're trying to manipulate our mission objectives to our best benefit. But the reality is that no matter how hard we try, we're going to have to make up for things that didn't quite go our way.
Yeah, that's cool. Shoot, I had another one I thought of while you were talking. Now it's
Was it cover? Everyone wants to know about cover.
you know, okay, so that is one thing I did want to mention is back during the last, rules update. Frankly, I did not like the cover changes.
Sure.
You know, these new ones, like I said, I haven't had a chance to play, but I've read through them all. And I think this stuff really addresses a lot of the problems I had with cover.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it's another thing I'm really excited to sit down and play. I think it's a good, positive change you guys have made for the game.
Yeah, so the cover changes, right? That was another iteration. We knew where we kind of wanted to go with cover, in that we really wanted that half range limiter. But at the time, it just the game, like in where we were with in terms of product development and everything else, we just weren't there. So 2.5 was definitely like trying to make the best of a bad situation in terms of fixing some of the major like concerns or confusions behind the system, but that also opened up some things like, for example, you know, if there's a barricade in the center of the table, like literally everyone can have heavy cover.
Yeah, and then, that's like an ATSC player. I found that very frustrating.
Yeah. So you know, we kind of went into it knowing that it wasn't going to be perfect, but that we needed to take one step to get to the next one. And the other big thing with cover was, and this took us a long time to kind of get to the right point on, was that cover being binary in terms of its damage reduction had absolutely, you know, it put Legion design into a box that was very, very small and very restricted. Because effectively what it said was, is you get 4 to 6 dice for your attack pool, depending on colors and some keywords, and that's it. If you go under that, you can't do anything. If you go over that, you're way too overpowered because you'll just obliterate a unit. And obviously, when you're talking about like all the different types of fighters in the Star Wars universe, all the different types of vehicles, all the different types of weapons, 4 to 6 dice of even 3 different colors is not enough, right, to make things interesting. It also limited how big units could get, and limited because if you're too small of a unit, you couldn't really do anything. If you're too big of a unit, you obviously blow out the game. Things like fire support obviously became very oppressive in that system because they could just break that general like blocks of how many dice are allowed before the game falls apart. And the other thing was, and this is kind of I think an AMG preference, but I think most people who play these games largely feel the same way, is that, you know, randomness and having things that can totally go your way, not go your way, rolling dice basically, is part of the fun of playing these games, right? The unknown and trying to mitigate the unknown and plan around it, but then also see those epic moments where somebody rolls 10 white cover save dice and they save all of them, and they roll 2 white cover save dice, they save none of them, and the unit gets destroyed. Those kinds of moments I think are really important to tell the story and to really bring home the exciting moments of the game. And so we moved to the cover system where it was like, okay, what if it's scaled? And if it's scaled in a way that the math largely works out to be the same if you start to do it based on the old system to the number of dice, right? And I know the community has been engaged in heavy discussion on this. And internally we actually created an Excel chart that was basically how many dice does it take to kill a unit of stormtroopers. And so we murdered a lot of stormtroopers on that chart, right? And like we would just hit the button and be like, okay, this is too much, this is too little. And through those permutations, we got to a point where we were very comfortable with the fact that like largely what players were getting was the same, but because it scaled both ways, it meant that unit degradation, which was a huge problem in Old Legion from our vantage point, right? Where we would see players and they'd be like, okay, I've killed 3 troopers from this unit, I'm going to ignore that unit because they don't matter until scoring happens, depending on which mission you're playing. That was a problem, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be like, well, my unit got pinged first, and now really what are they going to do?
They're going to hide behind the building and sit there to us.
And maybe they'll dash out, depending on which mission we're playing, to try to score some cheap points or whatever. But like we want these units to be able to be fighting for the long term. And we walked through a lot of different ways to do that, but at the end of the day, scaling cover in the way that we did, putting it to that half-inch range so that not everything gets covered, you actually have to be tactical in your movements and think about how I'm positioning with the line of sight and everything. It turned out to a system that we felt really strongly about. We saw a lot of excitement in the playtesters, and thus far it seems like has really taken with the community in terms of what it did. It also allowed us to make big units, which was a huge thing that we always wanted to see in the game. Is that, you know, it's a war game. It's about these. It's called Legion. Let's get that feeling on the tabletop. So we did the points adjustment. We did the big units, all that. That was all predicated on the fact that the cover system had to be adjusted and fixed.
So you mentioned, the randomness sort of being like an AMG preference in some ways. Is there anything else you think sort of in the rules changes kind of exemplifies like atomic masses philosophy when it comes to game design?
I think, and people have noticed this as well, right? Like we're really big proponents of forcing player interaction, not letting players like kind of cool their heels or wait. The positional game should be really important, but we want that to come at a cost, right? We want to put an impetus behind players to kind of feel like they need to engage. I always kind of relate it back to like if you watch a Star Wars movie, right? They don't dig into trenches. They're usually just walking at each other, shooting until they engage in combat. And you're like, why are you doing that? And I think that's one of the challenges when you're dealing with any game that has like long range firepower, right? Is we're not here to play a game where we're entrenched for 5 months and eventually somebody goes over the top and things happen, right? I think the goal more and more is that people want to get stuck into the action. They want cool things to happen. They want to play out the game, and then they want to have time to maybe play another game in the same time. And so one of the things that we've really gravitated towards, and you see this, I think, even around the industry, so it's not necessarily an AMG thing, but we definitely really believe it, is that consistent incremental scoring to a goal, right? Like getting players the impetus and the drive to say, okay, I need to engage. I can't just wait forever. Now, maybe it's beneficial for me to wait for a little bit because I think like my opponent's going to overcommit and then I can punish that. And so I can let them go up by 2 or 3 points because they're going to overextend and I can hit them really hard and I can win the attrition game. And once I've won the attrition game, I can start to reclaim those points back. I think that's really cool, right? But at the end of the day, it's really about trying to make sure that players have a reason and kind of a ticking clock in the back of their heads of, I can't just wait forever. I have to make a move, even if that move might not be optimal. And for us, I think it just leads into the whole, the feeling of the IP and the setting. And I think the vast majority of players who play these games and come to them, they're looking for those cool moments. Like they want to be able to have Anakin engage with Darth Vader and see which one would come out in a battle of like egos, right, on the tabletop, or to see those B1s like get decimated as their endless numbers come across the table as the clones are fighting with them. To see archers get engaged and like start blasting fools with their DC-17s, like all of that stuff, right? So that's definitely a core of our mission design, right? There's not a lot of bide your time and waits, especially like there were in the old deck where that scoring would happen at round 6, and so that creates a very different game environment. And absolutely, that is a viable game environment. But I don't think it's the one that necessarily we feel, based on all the feedback that we saw and some of the ways that players were engaging with it, makes for the right Star Wars gaming experience. And so we decided to kind of move into this system and to do it in a way that we've done many other times, which is that incremental scoring to a goal. We like the clock that it puts on players and the forced engagement and all of that. And I think it leads to a more dynamic and exciting game environment. Thus far, seems like the community mostly agrees as well, although it does dramatically change how players have to approach the game.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I think it's everything I've been from the community looks really, really cool. I want to jump away from the game itself for a sec. Talk about the new cards a little bit. First of all, you've made big changes to the design of the cards and the look of the cards. So kind of, what was the reasoning behind that? It's great you guys have, you provided it all for free. Online, so people don't have to buy card packs or conversion kits like X-Ray games or anything like that. But what did prompt that? Because a player looking to get into this, that's going to be a bit of effort they're going to have to do.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the print and play cards and the adjustments and stuff, that's been with Legion forever, right? Points adjustments, those printed cards are no longer accurate if you care about that. So you have to go look up the points adjustments. Errata rebalances, which have happened on certain cards over the lifespan of Legion, same thing, right? So it's always kind of just been baked into Legion's DNA that the card that comes in the box is not necessarily the most up-to-date card. But I think the important thing about that card that comes in the box is if you're not playing competitively or you've just gotten into the game, you can still play the game, right? Like you can play the game, you can start to understand what the game is, and that's great. And so we felt pretty comfortable with that, as the fact that traditionally, that's just been the way it's worked. I talked about the versioning system a little bit that was implemented by Fantasy Flight, and one that works really well with our experience because, again, we don't want to do hard edition breaks if we don't have to. So we can just simply version the game. And some of those versionings will be big. I mean, should we have gone by 1/10 of a point on our versioning instead of like 3.0? If we were real software developers, we probably would have done it that way, but we just upped it by 1 point. But anyway, so the idea behind the design change, right, the graphic design change, and why the cards look different is that one of our big pushes, one of our overall mantras, and the things that, from Shatterpoint's launch to the Crisis Protocol kind of redesign and revamp and everything else, has been getting the products to be multilingual. So that means that all languages can be in the box. Now, Legion has always been localized by various partners. But one of the big problems is that when there's only one single language in the box, you start to run into manufacturing problems, especially when you want to do reprints. Because every factory will only print a certain number of things. They have an MOQ, right, a minimum order quantity. And many regions in localization, right, they can't hit those numbers. So if you say, okay, I'm a French player, I want my cards in French. New product comes out, that's your biggest order number. When a new player in France comes in and says, oh, I missed out on this new release, but I'd like to get it, there's a reality in which, the demand just isn't high enough to be able to get the factory to print it. And so multilingual is a huge step in that direction, because what it does is it means that all of the product is good in all of the regions that it's localized, right? So not only does this mean that players won't have trouble getting the cards in their language, it means that from a supply and logistics standpoint, the product can be shared, it can be traded. It's a lot less in terms of the manufacturing process and stuff, because they're not making 5 different or 4 different products separately with the localized components. They're making one and putting everything in it. So it's a huge boon to the globalization of the game, to growing those markets. And so that was step one, was that we knew we wanted to bring Legion into that. But to do that requires certain considerations and, graphic design requirements so that localization can happen easily. In the old system, the cards were basically relayed out by the localization teams. So they would just create a whole new card based on the template from the original English card. Now what happens is that those cards can be black place replaced at the factory. So effectively, they just simply replace the black plate on the printing press, and those cards come out in whatever language is supposed to be there. Which means, again, it's simplifying the manufacturing process, it's simplifying everything across the board, which makes all of it much more realistic and easier for us to do, and to be able to grow the games across those localized markets. So a lot of the design considerations were that. And then, of course, the other big one was we wanted to kind of give an update to the logo to bring it into a situation where it was a bit more colorful, a bit more sharp, it jumped out at you across the way. Because the old logo, I think it's a classic, right? It doesn't necessarily jump off the box like you would hope, especially for, from our view, right? That's a very subjective thing, as all art is. But we wanted to kind of give something that was really going to stand out, that was going to be really poppy, and make people go, oh, yeah, what's this? I want to find out what it is. And so we did a logo refresh as well. And that comes back to, we talked about Ministrap, there's brand new product code, so currently if you happen to be an inventory junkie, which some people are, right now all of those products are SWL and then a number. The new products are SWQ and then a number, because everything's going to get moved into, over the course of the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on the process, into this multilingual format. But the big thing is to note, right, is that all the stuff, whether it's SWL or SWQ, the miniatures in them are still just as viable. They might be used in slightly different ways, or they might have different play patterns, but they're all the same. And that again goes back to, I think, a really important part about the versioning versus the new edition, right? In a typical environment, if somebody was to do a new edition, they'd be like, well, all that SWL stuff is no good anymore. It's completely out. So that comes back to the print and play, right? Part of that was simply, as we discussed before, print and play gave us the opportunity to give it to the players early, right? You don't have to wait. You don't have to go for 6 months and be like, they really have announced nothing. What's going on? Why isn't there anything coming out for Legion? Where's the big news, right? We've announced some cool things that are coming in a year, but it's a pretty light release schedule over the next 6-7 months until we get to Adepticon. And again, there was no need to put the community through that. Instead, what we wanted to do is really give a jolt and be like, here's what's coming, here's the exciting stuff. Be on the ground floor, and then when these products start rolling out, pick them up, don't, right? It's up to you. You've got the print in place if that's all you want to do. we're not here to sell you cards. We're here to sell cool miniatures and like make a cool game, right? And the cards are required for that, but they're not the core. They're not the heart of the game, right? So that was part of it too, right? It's just an understanding that we know players love to have all these components, like when they match and they're on the real cardstock and everything. And so those products are going to be available to you on the timeline that they always were. But for the interim, you've got them. If you don't care about it, you'll still have them, and everybody can go from there and move forward.
The card pack is scheduled for 2025?
Summer of next year.
Yeah. Plus, doing this refresh gives you a chance. Brand new art on everything. I think it looks fantastic.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. And I know people have brought up the fact that they're bummed that there's no art on the upgrade cards.
I was going to ask about that.
So, I mean, there's a number of different considerations that go into that. One of which is the fact that, again, localization, right? If you do a design that has an art box, then the text box has to be fixed. It can't go up and down for that black plate replacement. So that's usually fine, but sometimes, you might want to write a really cool rule or effect that has a lot of words. Sometimes you get unlucky and you pick the German words that are
I was just going to say, right? Sometimes German, uses the whole alphabet.
Yeah, and so when that happens, if you have a fixed box, right, then you are forced into lowering the font size or doing something that's probably not ideal. Yeah. By having the whole card, that whole card front is the text box, which means that you can fill the whole card with text. Now, my goal is to we never want to do that, but it's good to know it's there, especially depending on which languages we go into. So that's the real big consideration for it, and so that's kind of why we decided to make that step. And, it is sad to lose that art. We've tried to put that art, that art budget into other places, right? Really amping up what we've been able to do for the unit cards and everything else. So it is one of those things that there are always give and takes, right? Yeah. The ability to be able to work better with our localization partners, make the game available in more language, do multilingual. Its effect is that you really have to be cognizant of how the text works, how the text box works, how black plate replace text will work for all of that. That's the same reason part of the reason as to why we removed the reminder text from the unit cards was because that's just more text that you have to worry about. Is it going to break the box? Is it going to be too much? And the other thing too is that we found, because the game is a dynamic and we're willing to go in and make adjustments or tweaks to rules, is that there were so many reminder text, little buckets that were just completely wrong because the keyword had changed over the course of its life. And so as a new player, if you're like, oh, what's this? Oh, I think that's the rule. That rule could be completely off. It might not be the whole rule. It was too confusing overall, I think, from the player experience to just be like, okay, if it's a keyword, it's a keyword. Go to the keyword document, get the rules for the keyword. That's another AMG thing for us, right? We either want to give you the full rules text in all of its glory, or we're just going to give you the keywords so you can go find the full rules text in all its glory. We don't like to do half measures very much, but we just find that they're more confusing and unhelpful to a lot of players than they are helpful.
Awesome. So now under the new rules, what's your favorite unit to play now?
Ooh, that's a good question. As most of the community has found out, I do really love the new Anakin.
Okay, yeah.
I think he is a blast to play, and definitely fits my orky play style if I just want to run at you and hit you with things. But I think so. He's one. I've really enjoyed. I'm gonna pick. I don't want to just pick clones, but that's where my brain is right now. I really enjoy the new ARC Troopers, and because they live the fantasy of ARC Troopers and what they want to do and how they interact with the new missions and everything. I'm very excited for people to see the new generic Jedi attachment that comes with the ARC Troopers.
I'm very excited to see that
because that boy brings a whole nother level to the ARCs. In addition to doing some cool things for the ARC Troopers, but I think he really sings well with the ARC Troopers because he can attach to both. So that unit I think got a really great effect. Another one that I was really happy with, which was a very simple change, was the Rebel Troopers. And just the addition of agile, right? To really make that nimble, that dodge pattern work. They once we did that, and we started playing with them. They felt so much more like the Rebel troopers we see in Rogue One, and all over the place, right? Where it's just they're very hard to hit because they're very dodgy. But if you can like box them in, they quickly fold. And so I was really, really happy with that, especially anytime you can make like one little tweak, right? Not a whole rewrite. Anakin was kind of a whole rebuild. New command cards, new keyword like rules and stuff like that. That's you hope that you're doing really well. But when you can go back to something that's really classic or iconic and just say, it's just a number, or it's just a simple keyword adjustment. Those ones feel really, I don't know, they feel really special and good because you're just like, oh yeah, it's just that tiny little tweak, a finishing touch, and it goes from like, okay to like great. And so I did really enjoy where that turned out because it was such a simple change that, just made a lot of logical sense. And then all of a sudden the unit was playing exactly like the dream is on the tabletop.
So I think you guys haven't, it's not been a secret that Atomic Mass kind of really enjoys, hero units, those iconic characters, having those on the table. So what kind of prompted?
Now we're going to go back over to the top card. So the top
how much of that kind of went into your changes to the Jedi?
If it is a Force user, they're going to have two sides.
Dropped down the points on a lot of them. I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot more lightsabers on the table.
Well, so I think it was interesting, right? One of the biggest pieces of feedback or community discussions when we announced Shatterpoint, which is like, well, we don't want all these characters for Legion, right? Like, why don't we have this for Legion? Because I think Star Wars at its core, right? It's a character-driven narrative. The bigger battles around it are cool, but what we identify with as consumers of the media is characters, right? People become very attached to Luke Skywalker's journey. They become very attached to Han Solo. They become attached to Boba Fett, and I think those become the linchpin in all Star Wars games. Period. Right? Is those character anchor points. And the problem was, right, or the problem we kept running into was between the Force organization and the points costing and the way in which, the system simply works. It's like, okay, but if we give you 20 new characters, how are you going to use them? Because you can take maybe 4 at maximum, depending on their ranks, and then if you take those 4, like, your army's not going to be very good because you won't have an army. You'll just have 4 characters, right? And this was always the challenge of people who wanted to play like the original trilogy cast, Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie. You can do it, but it doesn't really function, right? The game is not built for that experience because it's an army game. So one of the things that we wanted to tackle that. We didn't want to fundamentally change the game to be just Hero Hammer, right? As the kids called it back in the day. But we did want to see more characters. We want to see more opportunities for people to run an Anakin and an Ahsoka next to each other, right? An Obi-Wan and an Anakin. And have the game be better supported to allow players to make those choices. So the points adjustment, going up to 1,000 points, obviously that was one. Re-looking really hard at what characters could do. The Jedi especially, right? What we discovered was that the Jedi were effectively paying a force push tax. When we looked and crunched all the numbers and really got into the analytics of the data, right? Our results said these characters are overcosted by 30 points to make up for the fact that force push costs 10. Right? Because that's just how the design works. Like there is a cost associated to every slot that you can take.
And you're always taking that resource.
Right, and so every single upgrade slot on a unit has a points cost associated with it, and that's why the upgrade costs are depreciated. Right, so the reason that you only pay 5 points for like and pick a training of any type, right? Is because the character's points cost has been adjusted to kind of make up the difference.
Have that slot,
right? But with the force, basically the force slot, because force push existed and force push was supposed to be cheap, all Jedi got a huge bump in cost. So our test that we started once we discovered this was, what if we just made force push cost an insane amount of points, and we subtracted those points from the Jedi, and that's effectively where we wound up. Where we still increased force push by about 10 additional points, because in the old system it would have gone to 20 and everything would have stayed the same. But instead we took those savings, we said, okay, we're going to take 20 points off the Jedi, which gives people more opportunity to not run force push, or they can, and you've really lost nothing, right? It's effectively the same, and then we could move that to 40. But by doing all of that and kind of re-looking at characters and readjusting them based on their effectiveness in the game and what they brought, being able to adjust kind of their offensive potentials through the new cover system, right? Notice not every single person has like sharpshooter now or things like that. And they're not all rolling black sharpshooter dice. Some of them get red dice with no sharpshooter and all these different things. It created an environment where we could comfortably re-points cost some of these things and allow players to be able to take 2 Jedi, you know, or a Darth Vader and a couple of Inquisitors, and not suddenly not have points for the rest of their army, right? And I think we've, you know, from my standpoint, from the team standpoint, and from what I've seen of the theory crafting and the list building and the community spending, I think we really hit that sweet spot of now you get to take several characters maybe that you identify with, but you're still playing that army game that Legion is, and you're getting the full experience. That before, I think players are really being forced into this sad corner of, I want to play with more characters, or I want to play with these characters, but I can't sacrifice the points because I can't spend half my points on these guys and then still fill out everything I need to do in a game of Legion. And so that was a really big push for us. We have a couple of other cool things that we're working on in the future to allow players to get more of those named characters on the tables in different ways. But again, that really from our vantage point, right, it was, okay, we can definitely tell that folks who play Legion, they want to see their favorite characters more on the table. And that jived a lot with what we thought, like what we wanted. But knowing that that was kind of a direction that we needed to go and how to solve that problem became a really big discussion point within the studio and a lot of where some of the focus went on the rebalance, how we were treating points, and the final decision to go up to 1,000 points was kind of influenced a lot by that, not just to see cooler, bigger armies for the Legion game on the table, but also to be like, you know, you can play with the exact same amount of units, but now you can just take more characters if you want. And the pass mechanic also kind of tied into that. Again, the thing with this adjustment is that unlike a lot of the other rebalances, which have been small or like focused on certain things, this one had so many inner working parts, so many things that were laced together in order to get where we wanted to go, that it kind of all had to come out at once. So everyone got dumped on with a really big update.
How much did you guys take into consideration as you were making changes to the units? Like, you know, how much some guys are seeing play versus not, like to try and encourage, you know, did you do any of that stuff? So you're like, we'd like to see this unit on the table more.
Sort of. It wasn't really like, we didn't set out with the intention of being like, okay, this unit never gets played, you know. For example, Fleet Troopers never see the table.
Yeah, that's
so
what I was thinking.
We're gonna fix Fleet Troopers in a way that everyone's gonna take them, right? Instead, what happened is that as we were analyzing everything and we were looking at unit balance, you know, we were saying, okay, why does one unit, you know, why are vets always taken over everything else in Rebels? And the answer was that they did everything that all of the other units did. They just did it better. So why wouldn't you? So that really filtered into the, you know, we talked a lot about faction identity and making sure that factions feel distinct. So that was part of the rebalancing effort was, okay, what is our overall vision for what the Rebel faction should be? What about Empire? What about clones? What about Separatists? And really distilling down and making sure that the armies played the way they should. Because, you know, I've been playing army games and tabletop miniatures games for a long time, and I think anyone who has jumped in has the same experience of the army you pick is reflective of how you want to play, right? And the best experiences are when you have a little bit of asymmetry between your factions, right? So the rebels are the dodgy ones. They're pretty courageous, but they fold under pressure and they don't have a lot of heavy armor. The Imperials are like the stoic, like they just inexorably advance on you and they crush you under their Imperial might. Those kinds of ideas that we see in the media and in the movies and the stories, how do you get those play experiences on the table so that when a new player comes up and they say, I'm really excited to get in this game, but I don't know which army I want to pick. You can be like, well, are you a sneaky player? Are you a crush them beneath your heel player? Are you an endless numbers player? Are you an elite player, right? Like, do you just want the elite guys? You can start to get those keywords and the player can identify, oh yeah, I like that play style. I like this play style. So we started there, but then within the factions themselves, that also came in. So it was like, okay, we understand why certain units are dominating within the list selection. Let's go in and make sure that every unit has a role. And we talked a lot about this during the mini extravaganza panels we went through the refreshes. But effectively it was, okay, let's look at the 3 Rebel core units. What do they do? Right? So Rebel Troopers, they're kind of your general objective takers. They're very good at survivability. They hit pretty well with their black dice, but their goal is to just go out and grab the tokens. They're your backbone, as a Rebel Trooper should be. Fleet Troopers, we had a lot of discussions about what to do with Fleet Troopers, but in the end we were like, I think what one of the voids the core needed was that close assault, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get in, they're going to rush you, they're going to get in, they're going to lock you down, they're going to be pretty potent in melee, but they're still going to be pretty fragile trying to get there, and they're going to have to be pretty clever and stuff. And so they became kind of the close range troops. And then you had the Rebel Vets, which, from the movies and everything, is like they're your entrenched troops. They're going to sit on your back line, hold your objectives, and fight off the offensive assault against them. And so once we kind of defined those 3 roles, we were then able to tailor each unit to be able to fulfill that role in the best way that it could, which then meant that as a player, you now have 3 viable options that give you different things, right? Nothing is just, this does everything that everything else does, but it better, right? It's, you have these different specializations, right? And it's very much how a lot of, modern armies work, right? You have these units that are specialized, you have units that are generalized, and so we just applied that over the course of all of the factions, all of the different core or force org chart options, and tried to make sure that everything had a role and a specialization that said, okay, if I want to do X, this is probably my best bet, but maybe these other things can do X not as good, but they do Y better, right? And that's where you get really interesting player combinations and choice and how I want to run things. What am I trying to take in my battle deck? So yeah, it wasn't we knew that there were units that were underperforming and needed a boost, but it wasn't necessarily let's just make them more powerful. It was let's figure out why they're not the prime choice, and then holistically determine, okay, how do we make it so everything works together and is a viable choice and has value and gives the player the opportunity and options to be able to construct a list that they want.
Okay, now last question,
okay,
and then we'll let you get back to your con. Big change, the clone.
Yes.
So now, what do you say to a player who looks at that now and says, I used to have 2 units, now I've just got twice as many of one
Sure.
unit,
So I mean, the first step, right, is that if we did the design right, and thus far it seems like the folks who have played have identified this as well, right, is that single unit now has the most customization of any unit. So we talked about how Rebels have 3 different types of core, right? You've got Vets who hold things, Fleets who charge things, and then the Troopers who go out and grab the objectives. The clone player can make all of those things between its leaders, its upgrades, all of its versatility. Additionally, you can do things that other factions, you can do combos, right? You can mix and match, and that really shows the elite nature of the clones. So at the end of the day, yes, you only get 1, but you have so many more dials and levers that you get to pull and turn between all the upgrades that you really get to customize your elite units. What do I want these guys to do? More so than any other faction, right? Every other faction kind of picks a role based on unit and then says, okay, I'm going to kit these guys to be the best at what they do, but that's what I'm locked into. The clones, in that clone infantry unit, it can be almost anything between the different combinations. Now you're going to pay some points for that, but that kind of goes in the territory of being elite, right? But that's really what I would say is that, we felt very comfortable with that. And they are going to get a second core unit with the marksmen who provide long-range fire support in a unique way. But from a phase 1 to phase 2, previous existence to just now clone infantry, you can do everything those core units did and more with the new system. And so I think it's much more, from my vantage point, right, as somebody who likes to play clones a lot, it's much more exciting from an army building standpoint. It feels much more like the clones you see on screen, where they're able to adapt and customize themselves because they're so rigorously trained to any situation. And it's another one where, I think the Galactic Republic over many of the other factions, because of the Clone Wars, just has the most named characters, right? There's so many named clones that people identify with: Waxer, Boyle, Fives, Echo, so many others that we haven't even touched yet. That army and the new clone infantry allow you to get so many of those characters on, right? You can have Waxer's unit from the 212. You can have Fives unit from the 212, right? And I think that's very cool as well. So yes, there are fewer binary options, but there are so many more creative and customizable options. So that would be my argument.
That all sounds really cool. Yeah, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. So all this stuff, like we said before, rules changes are on the website. New units coming out throughout the next year. Can't wait.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.